Hello everyone, I'm Jen and I make useful English Lit study videos on Shakespeare, poetry, fiction, literary ideas and more to help you become a literary expert. So if that sounds like what you need, make sure to hit the subscribe button below. So in today's video, we are examining Othello's character through the lens of Freudian psychoanalysis. Yes. Specifically, I'll be using the tripartite elements of Freud's personality theory, the id, ego, and superego, to look at what motivates and drives Othello's tragic behavior. Now, some of you may already know who Sigmund Freud is. He's widely considered to be the father of psychoanalysis, which is a branch of psychology concerned with how the mind's conscious and unconscious levels function in the human psyche. According to Freud, the fundamental elements in our psyche are the id, ego, and superego, which constantly interact to determine how we behave to meet our needs and desires, as we navigate the push and pull dynamics between our primal impulses, realistic self-awareness, and moral conscience. The id is the part of our psyche which seeks immediate gratification of wants and is related to the pleasure principle. The ego keeps this impulse in check and helps us seek our wants in socially acceptable ways and is related to the reality principle. And the superego is our sense of right and wrong, i.e. our moral conscience, which guides our decision-making and enables us to determine if seeking out a specific want is something we should or shouldn't do as per our principles and values. It's an interesting framework to apply to a study of Othello, because while it may seem like the Moor is driven to act in an id-dominant way, i.e. giving in to his irrational impulse by seeking rash revenge against his wife for her alleged infidelity, it's possible to interpret Othello's behavior as actually coming from the opposite instinct, the superego, as well, because part of him believes that he's administering moral justice by murdering his unfaithful wife. In Othello's delusion, it seems as if his superego looms large by driving him towards an uxoricide motivated by a lofty desire to rectify the woman's immoral betrayal. And by the end of this video, I argue that between Othello's id of wanting immediate answers about Desdemona's fidelity and a superego of seeking moral vindication, what emerges is actually a broken, problematic ego, which leads Othello to lose perspective on the truth of the matter. So with that, let's now dive deeper into how Othello's id and superego tug against each other and how his ego eventually fails to mediate between these opposite instincts. So buckle up because this is going to be a fun one. Now, if the id is concerned with the immediate gratification of desires, then there are two key manifestations of Othello's id in the play, both which lay the foundation of his and his wife Desdemona's tragedy. The first manifestation is his decision to marry Desdemona, despite the objective challenges of her being a white Phoenician aristocrat with a father who disapproves and a society that looks askance on interracial marriage. While the romance of their unlikely union is a beautiful story, it was probably not the most sensible social arrangement given the racial and cultural conditions in Renaissance Venice being very much stacked against Othello's favour. But Othello went ahead and married Desdemona anyway, which perhaps is an early indicator of the problems that would inevitably surface in their marriage down the line. The second and more fateful manifestation of Othello's id is his need for quick, definitive answers about the truth of Desdemona's fidelity. We often associate seeking pleasure with baser, carnal needs like sex and food, but much of the pleasure that the Moor seeks is actually epistemological, knowing for certain whether Desdemona has indeed cheated on him is that itch he desperately seeks to scratch throughout the play. And it's an itch so strong that he eventually scratches it to scabs before his ego can even begin to come in and mediate with reason and logic. We see this from the astonishing speed with which Othello changes his mind about Desdemona's loyalty in Act 3, Scene 3, where it only takes fewer than 40 lines before he goes from threatening Iago to present ocular proof about his wife's affair with Cassio to deciding himself that she must have cuckolded him. Villain! Be sure thou prove my love a whore. Be sure of it. Give me the ocular proof. Or by the worth of man's eternal soul, thou hadst been better have been born a dog than answer my naked wrath. Is it come to this? Make me see it. At the least, so prove it, that the probation bear no hinge nor loop to hang a doubt on, or woe upon thy life. And then 40 lines later, oh, that the slave had 40,000 lives. One is too poor, too weak for my revenge. Now do I see 'tis true. Look here, Iago. All my fond loves thus do I blow to heaven. 'Tis gone. Arise, black vengeance, from thy hollow cell. Yield up, O love, thy crown and hearted throne to tyrannous hate. Swell, bosom, with thy fraught, fratissive aspects tongues. Now, the irony about Othello's request for Iago to make me see it is that he doesn't need to see anything. Before Othello has even seen the ocular proof he's demanded, he comes to his own swift conclusion that now do I see 'tis true about his wife's supposed disloyalty. But of course he's not seen anything at all. So one way to explain Othello's bizarre about-face is to view it as the triggering of his id, the need for immediate quenching of his desire to know for sure where his masculine honor stands in this marriage. By the way, guys, if you find this video helpful so far, I'd massively appreciate it if you could hit the thumbs up button below and subscribe to my channel so that you don't miss out on any of my top grade lit study content going forward. I'd also encourage you to check out my membership program by clicking the join button below if you want exclusive access to members only study content and make special video requests. I'll see you there. The emotional imperatives Othello uses at the point where he decides Desdemona's culpability, arise, black vengeance, yield up, O love, to tyrannous hate, connote an upward movement, arise, yield up, which aligns with the structural placement of the Freudian psychological iceberg, with the id being positioned in the lower substratum of the unconscious and the ego and superego being above the id in the conscious levels. Over the course of the play, the bubbling concoction of Othello's id, that black vengeance, violent love, and tyrannous hate do indeed gradually rise up to cloud his conscious judgment, as it vies for dominance with his ability to moderate and judge his actions, i.e. the functioning of his ego. But is Othello's superego, i.e. moral judgment, fully suspended in the heat of his wrath and impulsivity, as he lets himself be led to forming misguided conclusions about Desdemona's character and ultimately committing the fateful act of murdering his wife? Well, it's fair to argue that for much of the play, it seems that the primary driver behind Othello's wife killing is his need to vindicate his wounded manhood. In the final act, we are told that he thinks he's rectifying a grave cosmic wrong on behalf of all the men who's ever been cheated on by their wives. So in Othello's mind, he's not so much satisfying an individual's primal impulse as he is restoring a greater moral balance in the universe. In Freudian terms, he believes himself to be acting from the superego rather than the id. This is reflected in his it is the cause monologue in Act 5, Scene 2, when he fashions a self-identity as a high minister of justice. It is the cause, my soul. Let me not name it to you, you chaste stars. It is the cause. Yet I'll not shed her blood, nor scar that whiter skin of hers than snow, and smooth as monumental alabaster. Yet she must die, else she'll betray more men. And then later on, after he kisses her, ah, balmy breath, that dost almost persuade justice to break her sword. One more. Be thus when thou art dead, and I will kill thee, and love thee after. Now, perhaps the strange thing about this moment is the measured regularity of Othello's syntax, which conflicts with the chaotic and impassioned emotions we've seen Othello exhibit for most of the play. Yet the rhythmic calmness could be a sign that Othello sees his behaviour here as entirely rational and morally justified, as reflected in his words minister and restore, in his self-bargain of if I quench thee, thou flaming minister, I can again thy former light restore, as well as his exclamation of Desdemona's balmy breath that dost almost persuade justice to break her sword. So what's interesting then is that at this point, Othello's superego does seem to be activated or even to overshadow his id. It's just that his superego's moral evaluation seems skewed and problematic to us contemporary audiences, because it determines a woman's moral lapse as something which justifies her husband's punishment even in such an extreme form as death. Hardly an acceptable premise in our post-women's civil rights and gender equality conscious world, but at least it offers a rationalization in Othello's head of his ghastly behavior. Indeed, the dramatic irony here is so poignant precisely because Othello sees his act as one of moral sacrifice. He's sacrificing his own marriage and happiness so that this woman doesn't betray more men and disrupt the moral equilibrium of society. This argument of Othello's superego being the stronger instinct than his id is also strengthened at the end of the play, when Othello discovers the devastating truth about Desdemona's innocence and Iago's manipulation, and commits suicide to compensate for his error. At first read, his request of being spoken of as one that loved not wisely but too well, of one not easily jealous, may come across supremely ironic. After all, it seems so clear that Othello has been driven to jealous, murderous rage by what he thinks is Cassio's replacement of him in Desdemona's affections. But if we consider our argument of Othello genuinely believing himself to be killing his wife out of a sense of moral obligation, however misguided or narcissistic it may be, then at least it makes sense for Othello to be uttering these words in earnest at this moment. A much more fundamental question to ask about Othello, though, is perhaps not so much about whether his id, impulse to gratify his masculine or epistemological desire, or his superego, awareness of adhering to a moral blueprint, loom larger in his psyche, but what role his ego plays in mediating between these polarizing instincts, and the effectiveness to which the ego performs this function. As a reminder, the ego in this context doesn't refer to the general sense of the ego as an individual's sense of self, but in the specific Freudian meaning of the medium through which primal impulses are expressed in socially acceptable forms. So one way of understanding how Othello's ego works here is to see his ego as activating a false superego, i.e. his misguided moral superiority, to suppress a chaotic id, i.e. his struggle with desiring Desdemona sexually, romantically, but also a paranoid need to ascertain her devotion as protection of his identity. So by embracing the notion that he is performing an act of moral adjudication by punishing Desdemona, Othello's desire of guaranteeing Desdemona's absolute love and constant devotion to him is granted momentary satisfaction and relief. Now, this also begs the question of whether Othello's act of murdering his wife would be any more excusable and justifiable had Desdemona really cheated on him with Cassio. The play's tragic crux is the Moore's gross misunderstanding of his wife's true nature. But had he been right about it, and if she did truly lapse in her marital commitment, would the play be any less tragic? Or would the tragedy simply be of a different sort, similar to, say, Shakespeare's other play about misunderstood lovers, Troilus and Cressida? And there you have it, guys. I hope you found this Freudian analysis of Othello's character to be a unique and refreshing way for your understanding of the tragic hero's motives, and that I have inspired you to look at the play in a different light. Psychoanalytic theory has its limitations, and I really wouldn't rely on it as the primary interpretative framework for literary analysis. But it nonetheless provides an interesting, well-developed set of ideas for us to engage with complex characters in Shakespeare. So for your next video, I would recommend that you either watch my It is the Course speech analysis, or if you are interested in another example of applying Freudian concepts to Shakespearean interpretation, you can check out my video on reading Macbeth with Freud. Hit that thumbs up button below if you found this video helpful in any way so that YouTube will notice spread it to other passionate lit learners like yourself all around the world. Make sure you hit that subscribe button below if you haven't already so that you don't miss out on any of my future weekly videos, and also hit that bell notification icon. You can also consider joining my membership program for exclusive video requests and essay review perks. You can click on that join button below this video to find out more. And as usual, I will see you guys in the next one. Bye!